Law 2. You need a pack. All species capable of grasping this fact manage better in the struggle for existence than those which rely upon their own strength alone. The wolf, which hunts in a pack, has a greater chance of survival than the lion, which hunts alone. Christian Laus Lang. There is a bond that is forged in conditions that cannot be replicated. It is not friendship. It is not loyalty. It is not love, at least not in any way that the civilian world would recognise. It is something older, something deeper, something that lives in the nervous system before it lives in the mind. Law 1 talked about fusing with the mission. This is the other fusion, the one with the people beside you, and it is forged through two things, and two things only: prolonged, intimate proximity and consistently shared hardship. Not discomfort. Hardship, the kind that rewires your brain, the kind where the person next to you is not your friend. They are your oxygen. You cannot survive without them, and they cannot survive without you. And that mutual dependency, sustained under pressure over time, creates a bond that is physiological, not sentimental. The civilian world calls this a tribe. It is not a tribe. Tribe implies culture, tradition, belonging by birthright. It is a word civilians use for their friend groups and their CrossFit gyms. It has been diluted to meaninglessness. Every startup has a tribe. Every podcast host is building a tribe. This is not that. This is a pack. A pack eats together, hunts together, sleeps in shifts, and moves as one. Not because it feels good, but because the members cannot survive alone. A pack does not exist for belonging. It exists for function, and when a member cannot keep up, the pack does not wait. It closes ranks and keeps moving. That is the bond the military builds. That is what you had, and that is what expires. The military does not stumble into this. It engineers it. It is the most effective tool in the arsenal, more powerful than any weapon system, more reliable than any piece of technology. Because a person who has fused with their unit will do things that no individual would do alone. But there is a cost to engineering a bond this deep. The cost is that it cannot exist outside of its conditions. The bond is not portable. It does not survive the transition to a world of cubicles, school pickups, and weekends at the lake. It is a product of its environment, and when the environment is removed, the bond does not break. It starves. But you do not feel it starving. Not at first. There is just a gut feeling that something is missing. You are used to operating independently. You have always been able to carry your own weight. Needing people was never the point. Being reliable was. Being clutch, the go-to, that was your strength. The pack was just there, always present, built into the job. You did not think about it because it was never optional. It was the air in the room. You did not notice it until it was gone. Then the job ends. No one says this is where it changes. There is no moment where the floor drops out. The calls just slow down. The group chats go quiet. New guys rotate in. The mission continues without you. Your name gets replaced on the board. The team photo gets updated. The machine keeps running and you are no longer a part of it. So you convince yourself you do not need a pack. In your head, the pack will miss you more than you will miss them. You tell yourself you are fine with that. And for a while, you are. You have your routine. You have your discipline. You have the habits of a lifetime spent being self-sufficient. You are a professional at being alone. You have been trained for it, but you are not trained for this kind of alone. The problem is not that no one is there. The problem is that no one is watching. There is no one checking your blind spots. No one throwing bullshit flags early. No one noticing when you are drifting just a little farther off your azimuth than usual. In the unit, that never made it far. Someone saw it. Someone said something. Someone pulled you back in line before it became a problem. It was not a conversation. It was not an intervention. It was a glance, a word, a hand on the shoulder. It was so constant and so automatic that you never identified it as a system. But that is exactly what it was. Outside, there is no friction. You can make bad calls, and no one flags them. You can isolate, and no one notices. You can drink too much, sleep too little, carry too much weight, and there is no corrective feedback loop. No one is responsible for you anymore. Not because they do not care, but because they do not know. They are not trained to see what your team was trained to see. They do not know what right looks like for you, so they cannot tell when something is wrong. Civilians mistake this for freedom. They think the pack was about friendship, about hanging out, about shared misery and war stories and matching tattoos. And sure, you were miserable together more than a few times, but that was not the point. That was never the point. The pack was a control mechanism, a standard, a constant calibration. You were not just supported, you were constrained. You were protected from yourself. The pack limited how far you could spiral before someone stepped in. It absorbed stress before it turned inward. It gave context to behaviour that would otherwise look like a problem. or go completely unnoticed. The guy who was too quiet at chow, the guy who was drinking a little more after the last mission, the guy who was not sleeping. In the unit, those were data points. Outside, they are invisible. When that disappears, nothing replaces it. Not your partner, not your best friend, not your therapist, not your dog. These are all valuable. These are all important, but they are not the same system. They are not calibrated to the same frequency. They do not have the shared language, the shared frame of reference, the shared understanding of what off looks like in a person who has been trained to never show it. The pack could read you in a way that no one else can, because the pack was built under the same pressure that built you. You do not lose the pack all at once. You lose it slowly, quietly. One unanswered text, one missed call, one fewer reason to explain yourself, one reunion that feels slightly wrong, because everyone is performing a version of themselves that no longer exists, laughing at the old stories, using the old language, pretending that the bond is still what it was. But you can feel the distance, you can feel the air in the room thinning. And one day, you realise you have been operating alone for a long time, and no one could tell you when it started. That is when things slip, not because you were weak, because the guardrails are gone, because the system that kept you in your lane, that caught the drift before it became a disaster, that told you when you were off and pulled you back before you even knew you were moving, that system has been decommissioned and no one built a replacement. The 61%. In 2023, 6,398 veterans died by suicide, 44 fewer than in 2022, but the rate still rose. 61% of those veterans were not receiving VA healthcare in the last year of their life. They were not in the system. They were not on anyone's radar. The suicide rate rose to 37.8 per 100,000 for male veterans and 13.9 per 100,000 for female veterans in 2023. Research from the Million Veteran Programme found that lower levels of social connection were directly associated with a greater likelihood of suicidal thoughts and behaviours. A 2025 study found that nearly half of veterans with problematic substance use, 47.4%, reported clinically significant loneliness. Separate research found that loneliness was more strongly associated with suicide in veterans than traumatic brain injuries or combat exposure. The pack was never about camaraderie. It was a detection system. It caught the drift before it became a disaster. When the pack dissolves, the drift goes undetected, and 61% of the time, the system never even knew they were gone. Historical example, the Vietnam rotation policy. In Vietnam, the US military made a decision that would become one of the most studied failures in the history of modern warfare. Instead of deploying and rotating units together, as armies had done for centuries, the military adopted an individual replacement system. Soldiers were sent to Vietnam alone on 12-month tours and inserted into existing units as individual replacements. When their year was up, they rotated home alone. The unit stayed, the individual left. The logic was administrative efficiency. The result was the systematic destruction of unit cohesion. Prominent military psychiatrists warned that the policy was having catastrophic consequences. Military scholars Richard Gabriel and Paul Savage, in their 1978 analysis, documented how the rotation policy replaced the soldiers' ethos of selfless service with pure self-preservation. An unspoken compact emerged. Stay alive, finish your year, go home. Take no risks. Trust no one you have not bled with, because they will be gone in months. David Hackworth called it the command musical chairs rotation policy and argued it led to a fundamental corruption of army values. By the war's final years, unit cohesion had collapsed so completely that entire companies refused orders, fragging incidents surged into the hundreds, and the practice of sandbagging, going out on patrol, hiding from the enemy, and radioing in false reports became routine. The lesson was not subtle. When you destroy the pack, you do not just lose morale, you also lose the pack. You lose the mechanism that keeps people functional, accountable, and alive. The military learned this lesson in Vietnam. It applied it in the decades that followed, rotating units together through Iraq and Afghanistan. But it never applied the same lesson to the transition out. When a veteran separates, they separate alone. They leave the pack as individuals, just like those Vietnam replacements did. The system that understood, at great cost, that you cannot send a person to war alone, still has not figured out that you cannot send them home alone either. The path forward. By the time you actually need a pack, you are walking in the dark, stubbing your toe every other step, trying to find one that works the same way. You will not find it, not the same way, but you can build something that serves the same function. A circle of people who know what off looks like, who have earned the right to call it, and who will not let you drift without a fight. It will not be the same. It will not feel the same. But the mission is not to recreate what you had. The mission is to build what you need. And you already know the blueprint because you lived inside it for years. And if you love a veteran, your job is not to be their pack. It is to not stand in the way of them finding one, and wherever possible, to clear the path.